Hi, this is Kathy from Gadgets Top 321, and in today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at the Visconti Mirage Mythose. Now, the Mirage Mythose is a redesign of the original Mirage, which is one of the more affordable Visconti models. The Mirage Mythose comes in 3 colors. There is the Zeus, which is a dark blue. It looks like it's got maybe some yellow or gold swirls in it. There's the Aphrodite, which is a purplish pink, I believe, and it's also got some swirls in it. And then I have the Apollo here, which is a brown. It's got different shades of brown. There's the darker areas, I believe, are kind of a dark translucent brown, and then there are some pearly chocolatey browns, and that might be silver. It looks kind of like a light brown, but it may just be because it's mixed in with these other brown resins. And since some of it is translucent and some of it is pearly, you get some nice depth. Now, one of the differences is the cap band has been redesigned. It's just a different pattern on the cap band. It says Mythos. All the trim is gold colored this time. The hardware has kind of a matte brushed finish to it, but it feels very smooth. It's shiny, but matte and brushed at the same time. And I believe it looks like there's maybe a clear lacquer coating on it. So it feels really nice. There's no roughness to it. It's a nice look. And on the end, you've got the My Pen system. Now, this is one of the differences. In the original Mirage, this My Pen system was recessed into the pen, where on the Mythos, it's on the outside. The clip is a spring-loaded rocker-style clip. This is the only Visconti I have, so I don't have anything to compare it to. I've heard that this style of clip is a bit tighter than like the ones on the Rembrandt, where it's hidden in, this top part is hidden inside. I'm not sure. It's usable. For me, a clip is just mainly a roll stop. The Visconti on the clip is laser engraved. Some models, usually the more expensive models, have lacquer around the letters. But I feel like that's nice looking. It looks good with all the hardware. Now, when I found out that I was getting this pen, I started watching some reviews. And there's not a lot of reviews of the newer model out because this hasn't been out very long, just a couple of months, I believe. So I was watching some reviews of the original model, and I believe it was in Doug Rathbun's video. He had a crack down at the back end of his. So, and I think it was only visible with a loop. And so I got my loop out. Let me grab it real quick. Let's see if this is going to be visible. Okay, there it is right there. And it is very hard to see, even under magnification. And I can't feel it, even when I'm running my hand over it with a fingernail. So I'm just going to let that slide. I'll keep an eye on it. If it gets any worse, I'll reach out to the retailer or reach out to Visconti. But for now, it's not affecting the function of the pen, and without extreme magnification and looking for it, it's not even visible. Now, in addition to the finish on the hardware being redesigned and some minor hardware redesigns on the exterior, probably definitely the biggest difference is the nib section. It's now got a number 6 size Schmidt nib. I believe the previous nib was also Schmidt, but it was a number 5 size. Yeah, it was. I remember that. And it was they're both, it's still stainless steel. They're both models had a stainless steel nib, both made by Schmidt, but the new nib is a number 6 size. And the grip section, instead of being made out of the same material, is now a metal grip section. And it's got a nice design that matches the design on the cap band, and it also feels like it has a clear lacquer coating. It looks like it has a brushed finish. Now, in the material I've read, it says the grip section is brass, and it's not heavy, but it's got a noticeable bit more of heft to it. I don't know if the cap band is made out of brass, but this is nice looking, and it feels good. I'm one who does not like metal sections for the most part. They're too slippery. And this does feel, it's smooth, but it's grippy. It's not slippery. And this almost acts like some subtle knurling if you do find this slippery. That's nice. One of the things that always kind of turned me off, just appearance-wise, about the Mirage was this step, but I find it very comfortable. I had thought it might feel unpleasant, but not at all. I'm going to do a writing sample and then talk about some issues I've had with the nib. I'm going to do a writing sample on some 52 GSM Tomoe River paper that's in an old Hobonichi Weeks, and then I'll take a look at some other writing samples that I did earlier before I did some work on the nib. Initially, this nib wrote excessively wet, but let's take a look at it now, and then I'll talk about what I had to do. Now, there was just a bit of a hard start there, but I did have it uncapped for a while I was talking. This ink is a nice match for this pen because it's a really wet writer, but this ink dries pretty quickly. It's Ackerman Israel Zabalau. And unfortunately, this ink is no longer available, so I'm going to have to, or I'm on the lookout now for another nice ink that performs well in this pen. I've got some samples that I'm looking forward to trying. I've got about a milliliter left. This was one of the first inks that I bought when I started testing ink samples. And it was always one of my favorites, but it was kind of too dry for my steel pilot nibs that I'm fond of. And I've been sitting here talking for a bit and didn't have any hard start there. So this ink I found is performing really well in this pen. And out of the box, this nib was smooth. I don't know if you can hear that. It's got a nice chalky smoothness that I like. And now it's wet, but not excessively wet. But out of the box, the reverse writing was smooth in all directions except to the left. So, and it was pretty scratchy to the left, but it's nice. The ink flow is so nice. And it's a nice, like, oh, I didn't even say, the regular writing is a medium, and I feel like the reverse writing is a really nice extra fine. So I wanted it to work, but it was really scratchy to the left. So I did use a sharpening stone. I had to get pretty aggressive with it. A sharpening stone, and then I think this is for honing. It's a little bit smoother. And then I use some micro mesh to do the finishing smoothing, and now it is nice. But the problem I had was initially the regular writing was excessively wet. Let me show some of the writing samples. I started out in my old Leuchtturm bullet journal, and let's see, here was the initial writing sample, and I don't know if you can tell, it's just really, it was really blobby. And let me see. It looked like, when I was writing with it, it looked like it was getting ready to burp out a blob of ink. I checked the feed, or I flipped the pen over and looked at the feed. I didn't have, I don't know if you've ever had a pen that had blobs of ink just barely holding on to the feed, just getting ready to drip out. But I didn't have that. You know, the ink was up in the feed. There were no visible blobs. But one thing I did notice, even before I inked up the pen, the tines of the nib, in most pens, they just barely touch at the end. Well, they were parallel. And I thought, oh, you know, it's a medium. That's already on the edge of what I'm comfortable with. I prefer fine and extra fine nibs. I thought, oh, this is going to be a wet one. But my Pilot E95S also has parallel tines, and it's a wet writer, but it's usable. I like it. It's a nice writing nib. But when I started writing with this one, it was excessively wet, and I would write, like I wrote all of this, and it was still wet up here. That's kind of inconvenient when you're wanting to write and flip a page, when you're journaling, or especially if you're taking notes. Makes it less practical. And I was making notes as I went along about how wet the nib was, and the reverse writing was a little bit scratchy. And I was kind of concerned because, I'm glad I wrote that down. One of the things I was concerned about was with it being so wet, and this being a magnetic capping system. I don't know if I even mentioned that. This has the same magnetic capping system as the original Mirage, and it's got these little indentations in there, and it's got little notches in there that line up, and I like that. You know, people comment about, hey, it makes the flutes of the pen line up, but for me, it keeps that cap from spinning and being loose. I don't like that on snap caps. I don't like it when the cap is loose and wants to spin around. So that's two things that are good about it. But with the nib being so wet, I was worried about the magnet up in there corroding. So I felt like I wanted to work on it a little bit. So I had inked it up originally with Diatramentis Sherlock Holmes, and I never really thought of that as an excessively wet ink because I always use it in fine and extra fine nibs, my Pilot steel nibs, which are a little bit on the dry side. So I cleaned that ink out. I had it inked up in the converter. I cleaned that out, and I noticed that the feed was just a little bit wonky off to the side. So I kind of straightened that up a little bit, and I noticed that the tines kind of came together a little bit. And so I cleaned the pen out, and I checked it again, and I noticed they were spread back out. So I kind of fiddled with the feed a little bit more. Now, this Schmidt nib section has kind of like a lot of Jowo nib sections. It's a threaded nib section. It's not friction fit in there. You can screw it out and it just comes out in an entire section. Now, I assume the feed is and nib are friction fit into that little nib unit, but I didn't want to pull around on it. The good thing about it is that little nib unit has a metal reinforcement band. I have seen on Instagram people having problems with their Yovo nib units cracking. So that's a nice thing about the Schmidt nib units. I looked around, I got online and looked just to see if I could order a replacement nib unit, and I found some on eBay just in case I wasn't able to get this one straightened out. And they all of the ones I saw had that metal reinforcement band. So I like that. In the future, I might buy a fine nib for this pen, but right now I'm really happy with the medium. So after I cleaned it out, I dip tested it, and it was writing noticeably drier. Not dry, but it was noticeably drier. It didn't look as blobby as it did up here. It was a little more controlled, but my ink still wasn't drying fast enough. So I cleaned out the Atramentis ink and tried an ink that I knew was pretty dry, Ackerman Israel Zablau, and it performed much, much better. Let's see. I'll go ahead and show the writing samples that I did on this Tomoe River paper. You can see it didn't bleed through or anything, but my initial writing sample, you can see how blobby it looks. And then writing test number 2, I don't know if you can tell, I can, is noticeably less blobby. And you can really tell in the reverse writing. Look how wet the reverse writing was. It wasn't as noticeable of a difference in line width between the regular writing and the reverse writing because both were so wet. But once I kind of straightened up the feed and closed up the nib slit just a little bit, you can see a difference between the two, and you can really see that the reverse writing is much more controlled. And then when I switched over to the Israel Zablau, I had a little bit of trouble at first. I can't remember. I think I had inked up the converter and I hadn't primed the feed or anything, so it was just a little bit dry getting started. But now I've been writing with it quite a bit in my journal and taking notes and whatnot, and I am loving the way that it writes. So even with some of the little, I call them minor issues, they were issues that I'm comfortable with, like the microscopic crack in the back and the finicky nib that I was able to fix myself. But I know if I had gotten this in the past, I would have, and didn't know how to fix the nib, it would have frustrated me. That makes me think this is a good pen to get from a retailer that has good customer service or that can check the pen for you before they ship it out. Maybe someone like Applebaum that has a nib specialist that if it is like too wet like this, they can adjust the nib. Or my husband got this for me from Goulet Pens if I wasn't able to fix this. Now, let me say something. Don't try to fix the nib and then contact your retailer. I would recommend contacting the retailer first if returning the pen is something that you're thinking that you're wanting to do. Once I started working on the nib, I knew I wasn't going to be able to return it to Goulet's. And I waited a bit before I started fiddling with the nib because I thought, I might end up having to exchange this or return it. But with this being one of these swirly resins, and I got one that I really like. I like the look of this. The swirls are nice and uniform and they look so good. I didn't want to return this pen. So fortunately, nothing was so bad that it's not something that I wasn't able to deal with. So I know my sister has been happy with her original Mirage. I remember when she got it, she spoke very highly of it. She loved the way the nib wrote. You know, it has that smaller nib, which most of my pens do have smaller nibs. But her My Pen medallion fell out. I'm not sure how much it costs to get a replacement for these, but that's something I'm going to keep an eye on. Oh, there are a couple more things I forgot to mention. One of the things I do like about this pen is there are metal on metal threads. So there's metal in the body of the pen and metal threads on the section. It comes with a branded Visconti converter. Now, I believe this is just a Schmidt converter, and it's one of the less expensive models of converters. One of the Schmidt converters comes with like a metal reinforcement down here at the end, but this is just plastic down at the end. I wish it had come with one of the more premium converters, but they're not that expensive. If I need to, I can get one of those. And I guess I can go ahead and show the packaging real quick. It just came in a sleeve. And that's a nice design on the box. Just a cardboard box. It's a nice heavy box, so it can be repurposed. And a little pillow. It was in a cellophane sleeve on a little pin bed. And then it just had a little pamphlet. So that's a nice box that can be repurposed. You can keep some of your pen stuff in it on your desk. It's a nice looking box, nice design, and it doesn't have a ton of branding on it, just a nice subtle Visconti on the top. All right, if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.